Hi. We're going to read today portions of Isaiah 13 and 14, chapters 13 and 14. And Babylon, the decoration of kingdoms, the beauty of the pride of the Chaldeans, must become as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. She will never be inhabited, nor will she reside for generation after generation. And there the Arab will not pitch his tent, and no shepherds will let their flocks lie down there. And now into chapter 14. For Jehovah will show mercy to Jacob, and he is yet certain to choose Israel, and he will actually give them rest upon their soil, and the resident must be joined to them, and they must attach themselves to the house of Jacob. And peoples will actually take them and bring them to their own place, and the house of Israel must take them to themselves as a possession, upon the soil of Jehovah, as menservants and as maidservants, and they must become the captors of those holding them captive, and they must have in subjection those who were driving them to work.
I believe the reason we put these two passages together is to show the inconsistency of the Watchtower in the way they apply the book of Isaiah and much prophecy. To their credit, the Watchtower always interprets the Babylon passages literally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is, you could go on in that chapter 13 and 14, about the application of these prophecies, many in a literal sense, to Babylon. The part that, of course, we didn't know when we were Jehovah's Witnesses is that many of these prophecies about Babylon were fulfilled literally long after the apostles had died. So it shows that God was still fulfilling literal prophecy about the pagan neighbors of Israel long after the days of Jesus and the apostles. Now, that's an awkward fact because it shows, again, an inconsistency in the Watchtower. If you think that God was still fulfilling prophecy literally long after the apostles and Jesus had been killed by, you say, the Jews, then what's the reason he's doing this long after? Well, in the context, it's because of the hostility of these nations, the cruelty of these nations towards Israel.
I think it's an awesome point in the sense that it shows you God is faithful.
Yeah.
So even when things to us, in the way we would look at it, well, Israel isn't obedient and they're doing this or that, we just sort of disregard these people. We dispose of people who irritate us. You know? But God is faithful to his promises.
Eternal promises. So it is true that this chapter 13 of Isaiah and chapter 14 and two complete chapters of Jeremiah devoted to the Babylon prophecy about her eternal destiny, all related to the destiny of Israel and the hostility and cruelty of these nations towards Israel. So if that's so important to God that he goes on fulfilling these prophecies, and now Babylon is still desolate to this day, Nineveh was buried until fairly recently. If that's so important that it is God's testimony or God's witness to his eternal relationship with Israel, as well as the eternal veracity of his prophecies, then we have to make some kind of coherent picture out of this. And the picture is that the reason given in chapter 13 and 14 of Isaiah has to be honored. That is, God's eternal covenant with Israel is the reason that he fulfills prophecies in judgment and also in grace.
And I'm thinking the witnesses love to talk about Jehovah being vindicated. Well, this does vindicate him.
Yes.
Because it shows you that God is faithful. We aren't. Israel wasn't. But we aren't either. But God is faithful.
By the way, we might even put a plug in for certain books that the Watchtower has published that actually helped us to see how literally God does fulfill prophecy. So there are many fine articles the Watchtower has published over the decades and in books. For instance, Is the Bible Really the Word of God? Where they have detailed the literal fulfillment of these very prophecies. If you read chapter 13 and Jeremiah 50 and 51, you will see the amount of space God gives to the subject of this specific nation, the nation where his people were exiled, and that nation becomes the birthplace of the Bible canon, really, that has blessed all of us. Babylon, therefore, is, you might say, the incubator for what we now think of as the Word of God, because the canon was formed there and shortly after the Babylonian exile. In the next segment, we'll talk about chapters
24 and 25
24, 25
of Isaiah.